Okay, thank you everyone for attending this session. I'm going to speak about negotiating strategies. My background is as a lawyer and the head of partnerships for a number of venture-backed startups. I currently run a consulting business where I help companies with their partnership and social impact strategy. I am an executive advisor to the Lookout Foundation. The Lookout Foundation, is one of the founding partners in Day of Security. And everything that I do is about negotiation. So, I'm a lawyer by training. I graduated from law school many, many years ago, and I've done many sessions on teaching negotiating strategies for different groups of entrepreneurs, many women's groups. And I have sort of some rules of thumb that I've codified over my 30 years of my career. And I'm going to walk you through those. And, when I started doing these sessions, I really focused on negotiating partnerships because that's what I do for a living. And what I found is that um, people were very interested in how they could use negotiating techniques and strategies for many different things, whether it's hiring an employee or negotiating a raise or a promotion with your employer, whether it's negotiating with your children. I often joke with my lawyer friends that when my kids were younger, we would rather negotiate with Microsoft than with our children. So anyway, I've sort of broken my strategies down into 4 areas. One is align goals and authentic connection. 2 is about successful negotiating techniques. And 3, particularly when you're negotiating a commercial agreement, a partnership even for a job or a divorce, to have a carefully drafted agreement. And the last is setting realistic implementation guidelines. So when I talk about, authentic connection, when you're approaching any relationship, whether it's, for a new job with an investor who might be investing in your company, um, with your partner, your spouse, your ex-spouse, even your children, is do you have aligned goals? If you're talking about taking an investment in your company or going to work for someone or hiring someone, is this investor, this employee even, are they in it for a long haul or for a quick buck? Do they really care about, what you're doing? Are your mission aligned? Do they have the experience? Do your styles and work ethic match? That's, just going in, starting with that is going to make the negotiations much, much easier. Um, when you're negotiating with a strategic partner, do they really need your product? Will having this deal streamline their business? I've worked with a lot of startups over the years. And, one of the things that I've seen is that, startups will often be so eager to get a relationship in place with a marquee name company, that they'll sort of bend over backwards and kind of lose sight of what their product vision is. And so I will often say, you should not do this deal and agree to the features that they're asking for unless they were already on your product roadmap or it's something that's going to make your product better that you hadn't thought of before. And again, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have an authentic connection with whoever it is that you're negotiating with. Now, this is interesting, is when I think about the negotiating techniques or strategies, there was a book that we read back when I was in law school, which was like a long time ago, called Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury. And that was really known as the Bible for negotiating. There are a lot of really, really salient points in there that have guided the way that I've led my negotiations for most of my career. Interestingly enough, in the last couple of years, a book has come out by a guy named Chris Voss, who is a hostage negotiator. His book is called Never Split the Difference. And it's a very different thing. So he talks about, the techniques in getting to yes is rational problem solving. And so what's interesting about that is that it makes a lot of sense, but negotiations are not always rational. And everything I just said about having authentic connection and aligned goals, obviously, if you're negotiating for hostage release, that's probably not what you're going in with. But what I've realized is that the principles in getting to yes have led me, but I've always added my own twist. And perhaps because I'm a woman, or perhaps because it's just my nature, that I have unwittingly integrated some of the principles that Chris Voss talks about into my negotiating techniques. So first, I'm going to talk to you about like the principles from getting to yes and what I've deployed over the last 30 years. And then I'm going to get into a lot deeper discussion about Chris Voss's book and what he talks about, because the theme of this particular session track is emotional intelligence. And that's what his negotiating techniques are all about. It's about creating an emotional connection with the other side to help you overcome some of the lack of the authentic connection that you might have and how to get there. So first, when I think about the principles in getting to yes, the rational problem solving techniques, and I think no matter what, you should do this. Knowledge is power. Before you go into any negotiation, do your research. Whether it's for a new job, what are the salary bands? What do people usually get in these roles? One thing is, Brenly, you're going to kill me for saying this, but like you have your best chance to get the best salary coming in. One of the reasons that women fall so far behind in men in salaries is because they don't negotiate for themselves coming in the get-go. It's your best chance. If they want to hire you and it's the right fit, you should ask for as much as you possibly can in the beginning. Know your bottom line from the get-go. Whether it's negotiating a partnership, know what you can and can't live without. And so what I would say, and Chris Voss would disagree with this, but it's like, you have to know your bottom line. And if you can't get the basic tenets of what you want, the partnership's probably not going to work. Don't sweat the small stuff. Make sure like, what are the 3 things you can't live without, and let go of the little things. I'm a lawyer and a partnership builder, but as a lawyer, one of the reasons I had to stop functioning in just a strictly legal role is because as a lawyer, it's your job to make sure that when you get to the agreement that even the small things like the indemnification clauses are drafted exactly right. And I got to a point where I'm much more interested in the bigger partnership and didn't want to spend time. And so I think in your negotiating for yourself or for your company, remember that. This is something that I, as I mentioned earlier, unwittingly developed in my negotiating strategies is listen. One of the things is that when you're in negotiations, people often don't listen to the other side. And if you're representing your company and going to a negotiation that's for a really important partnership, a long-term partnership, I always say it's best to bring 2 people to the meeting, because whoever's leading the negotiations, is probably going to be focused on that, and to have someone else who can listen to the other side if you're not able to. But always make sure that you're listening to what the other side is saying. Let them know that you're listening and that you understand what they're saying. And this is actually one of the principal tenets in Chris Voss's book as well. Be firm but courteous. I worked with a lot of people, particularly I was at AOL for 7 years back in the 90s, late 90s. And, we had our head of corporate development was not a very nice person. And he would throw tantrums in the meetings and everything else. And, that doesn't really seem to me the way that you want to lead your negotiations. You want to focus on interests, not positions. So when the other side is, digging their heels in and saying things, don't let that, put you off guard. You want to focus on where can you find the common ground? Where are your interests aligned? Not the position that may just be a stalling or negotiating tactic. Separate the people from the problem. And this is really interesting. Once again, that I've had negotiations where, I did a lot of work in the entertainment industry where the heads of studios and their lawyers were really obnoxious. And, they were so rude that it sort of made me not want to do a deal with them. And so, but, as a representative of my company, I had to step back and say, look, this is not a personal thing. This is about getting a deal done. It's not about a personality order or disorder. Interestingly enough, when I get to talking about Chris Voss's strategies, he thinks that separating the people from the problem is completely nonsensical, that the negotiators are always people and that you have to have an emotional connection in order to get anything done. You want to invent options for mutual gain. If you come to a stalemate in the negotiations, you want to think about where can you give in a little bit and come up with, as I said, options for mutual gain. Again, when things get sticky You want to insist on using objective criteria and try to remove the subjectivity from it and use objectives. And then this is number one, most important thing. When you get to the yes, like a real yes, which we'll talk about in a little bit, stop negotiating. When you get what you want, stop talking and immediately get your agreement drafted, whatever it is. Someone turned me on to this podcast recently called Shut the Fuck Up Fridays. It's about these lawyers who, basically it's really about how to deal with the police, and it's called Shut the Fuck Up Friday. So that basically is saying, get what you want, shut the fuck up. Okay. Anyway, so that's, really, it's worked pretty well for me in my career. And I think that the strategies have worked well for people. But now when I read this book by Chris Voss, it really made me, I actually rewrote this entire presentation because I thought what he's talking about is really, time check, is really what this is all about the emotional connection. He calls it like the psychology, negotiating with psychology and emotional intelligence. And the number one thing he opens the book with is listen, 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 listen. Don't listen to the voice in your head, listen to the other side. Don't make assumptions. Hold several hypotheses in your head as to what it is that they might want. Remain open to possibilities. As you're listening, it's also important not just to listen, but to let the other side know that you're listening. Pause in your speech. Silence is a really powerful tool. It lets them know that you're listening to them. When they're talking, encourage them. Say yes, say, I understand. Paraphrase what they're saying. When you're negotiating, the way that you present yourself is really important. Speak slowly, calmly, deliberately, not assertively. And Chris Voss talks a lot about using the late night DJ voice to be very calm and soothing, and letting people know that you're not going to beat them over the head, and that you're there to come up to an agreement. Mirror their language. He said it's very important when you're negotiating to repeat the last three words, or the three most important words that you heard the other side say. Repeat them with an inquisitive tone, letting them know that you're like, okay, I hear what you're saying. Again, this is something that I talked about earlier, making the authentic connection. Really try to create a meaningful relationship. He talks about tactical empathy versus what Fisher and Urey talk about is separating the people from the problem. The tactical empathy and how you create it is, by your body language, the way that you present yourself, and watching them. Observe their face, their tone, their gestures, their feelings. He talks about a rule that I had never heard of before, but I really like it. It's the 7-38-55 rule. It's how our message is interpreted. What he says is that the way that you're interpreting, or the way that people are interpreting what you're saying, is 7% based on your words, 38% based on your tone, and 55% based on your body language and facial gestures. And to really watch if the body language and facial gestures do not match the words, they're probably lying. The other side is probably lying. And you want to, he gives you some tips and tricks. Obviously, hopefully, in most of the people who we're negotiating with, if you're are not lying to you most of the time, unless it's your children. We all know they lie all the time. But with a hostage negotiator, he's dealt with some people who are probably lying to him a lot of the time. But he says, yeah, watch them. If their words don't match their facial adjustments. He also talks about something called the Pinocchio Effect. If someone starts using really long words and sentences, they're probably lying. And he talks about the rule of 3. Try to get the counterpart to say yes 3 times in 3 different ways. This is a trick. My father was a trial lawyer, and my siblings and I became the best potential witnesses of all time, because my father would use this trial lawyer trick as asking the same question in different ways, trying to trip you up with a different answer. What did you do Friday night? What time did you come home? Things like that. But the rule of 3, get them to say yes 3 times. And the other thing that Chris Voss talks about is that liars tend to speak in the third person. So if they're saying, well, he might do this, if they don't use the I, there's a chance that they're lying. Another trick he talks about is labeling emotions. So if you're listening to someone and you can identify or reveal what their emotions are, to state out loud, I see that you're feeling angry or frustrated or whatever it is. By doing that, it can have the effect of boosting the good part of the negotiation, but also diffusing the bad part. He also talks about an interesting thing that sounds completely counterintuitive, but is an accusation audit, that you verbalize all the worst things that your counterpart might say about you. I mean, that seems like you wouldn't want to do that, but he says by doing it, by stating them out loud, you kind of take their power away. So I think, you know, he talks, a little bit more deeply about something that he calls the behavioral change stairway model. And this is the 5 stages of a negotiation: active listening, empathy, building rapport, influence, and behavioral change. And by moving through these 5 steps, he says that it will get you to a place where you can build the trust and the empathy that is needed to get to an unconditional positive regard. And he believes that you need that in order to get a positive negotiation done. What you want to do is, instead of trying to get to yes as quickly as you can, is you want to get them to say that's right. And by saying that's right, that's how you know that you're on the right track, that they've heard you, they understand you, that they agree with you, and that you'll be able to get to a real yes that you want. Chris Voss talks about, completely counterintuitive to the getting to yes model, is that recognize and embrace the power of no. That if early on in your negotiation, the other side says no, what that means is that it puts them at ease, because people like to feel in control. And if they're able to say no at the beginning, it relaxes them and lets them put themselves in the hot seat. Out of the hot seat, and lets them feel like they're in control, because they've told you no. They've let you know what they care, and that don't be discouraged by that. It just means that you'll be able to get to yes, to a real yes. And he talks about being aware of a yes that isn't a real yes. There's the yes that's a real commitment, and then there's a yes that's just the confirmation of like, yeah, I heard what you're saying. And then there's a yes that's just a counterfeit, that they're just saying it and they don't really mean it, and understanding how to identify that. Yes, the 2 books. Yeah, thank you, Brenley. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And the other one is Getting to Yes by Fisher and Yu. I think they're both great, but this particularly for this, and the Chris Voss is, I actually saw him speak in first person. He's incredible. He's got, of course, incredible stories. I can tell you about deals that I won. My best deal I ever did was I was negotiating for AOL for the movie You've Got Mail. You guys maybe remember that, with Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. And Microsoft had come in and offered the producers at Warner Brothers $8 million to put the MSN screens in the film. And the lawyer said to me, our trademark lawyer said we can call the movie You've Got Mail. And I said, great. Call the movie You've Got Mail, but you can't use our screenshots. You can't use our voice mark. You can't use anything. Go ahead. And they said, well, how much are you going to give us? And I said, well, I'm not going to give you anything, because basically, that you can't make the movie without us. So we ultimately made a $250,000 donation to Nora Ephron, the author's favorite charity. And basically it was a 2-hour advertisement for AOL. That was amazing. But, to call their bluff. Anyway, getting back to sort of some more negotiating strategies. Chris Voss also talks about something called bending reality, which is resisting the urge to succumb to deadline pressures. Don't get caught up in that. Focus on, offering what is fair. This is interesting too. Inviting your counterpart to interrupt you. It kind of disarms them and lets them say that you're really listening to them, and it's kind of flipping the script, if you will. And there's another, kind of tactic that he says, it's called loss aversion. People tend to take greater risks in order to avoid losses than to achieve positive gain. That's sort of interesting. Now, this is something that I hope is going to be super helpful to people in this room, is your salary and other monetary negotiations. When negotiating with money, always, always, always try to let the other side go first, because the first price is often negotiable. If you have to go first, then offer a range. Don't give a solid number. He also says that you should use odd numbers. Rounded numbers seem less permanent. And if you use odd numbers, it seems like it's much more thoughtful. And another thing he talks about is complement the monetary terms with non-monetary offers and be persistent. So that by talking about non-monetary things that you care about or maybe don't care about, the red herring can help you get the price up higher if that's what you want, or lower on the other side. If the other starts really low, how do you aim really high? Well, I mean, again, that comes back to what I said earlier. If you're that far apart, if they start really low, I mean, you just have to tell them, no, that's not acceptable to me, and that's not going to work, and this is where we're starting. There were some more details. Oh yeah, this is interesting. He talks in the book later about this Ackermann bargaining model. And I really like this strategy. I've actually never sort of codified it in this way, but he says that you set your target price and your first offer in your mind, as you set the target price in your mind. And if the first offer is at 65% of that, then the next time you go back is at 85%, 95%, you end at 100%. And he said, when you get to that target price, make it precise. And again, by adding in these non-monetary things that you may or may not care about, helps you get the price actually up. So honestly, this book is fantastic, and I would highly recommend reading it. He talks about ways to use calibrated questions to turn what could be a conflict into a collaboration, using soft phrases like perhaps, maybe, it seems like this is what you want. Avoid using yes or no questions. You want to ask your other side questions that will elicit longer answers that can have the impact of buying you time to really think about how to digest what they've said, but also to get them to talk more and help you understand more about it is what they want. You want to exercise self-control. You want to regulate your behavior, avoid impulses and impulsive and emotional reactions. Another thing he talks about, beware of agents behind the scenes who may be exerting influence. Now, obviously, this is really profound in a hostage negotiation, but even if the salary negotiation, I found that most companies have bands that they're able to offer in terms of how much they can offer for this particular position. And, whomever you're negotiating with may not have the ability to go higher. They may start lower. I always try to give people who work for me that I give them as much as I possibly can, but not everyone's like that. So he talks also about looking for psychological cues. That's all the things we talked about, the body language, the this and that, listening to what people are saying, seeing how they're there. And when you're negotiating, he says that you want to identify your own negotiating style as well as the other side's. He thinks that there's 3 basic styles, and that you want to know which is your natural style, which is theirs, and know when to use which, and go back and forth between. One is the analyst, who is calm and methodical with a lot of attention to detail. They like to seek reciprocity, or they're going to lose trust. When they're silent, it means they're usually thinking. And if this is your style, you want to try smiling more and try harder to establish a rapport with the other person. The accommodator is someone who seeks a win-win outcome. They're engaged in really flowing communication. It's very easy for them to build a strong rapport with the other side, but it can be difficult to understand what their real objective is. So that's when you really want to use the calibrated questions to try to eke out more and more what they're saying. And then you really want to get them to really put their talk into action, because they sometimes are hiding their objectives, what they really want. And then the third is the assertive. They're fiery, direct. They love winning. They value being heard and achieving goals. With them, you really want to use the mirroring or labeling technique and the calibrated questions to really, again, eke out what it is that they really, really want and what you can get. With them, you want you want to use the I, not the third person, and you need to be ready to walk, but never ever resort to personal attacks. The last thing he talks about in the book is something called the black swans, which are the unknowns that you really want to be aware of in your negotiations. Are there things that you can't possibly know, and that will impact what the outcome is going to be? So again, these are getting to yes and never split the difference, give you 2 different types of negotiating styles. I think a mashup of the best of each and what works well for you is the best way that you're going to get what you want. So for me, again, I talked about this earlier, but once you get to the answer that you want, whether it's a deal or a divorce settlement or, you know, a job offer, get to contract as quickly as you can. Get that contract drafted. I know this happens with companies. It's been hard for me as a head of business development and general counsel. Everyone wants to blame the lawyers. I had someone who worked for me once, like I heard him on the phone, like telling a partner that the deal was caught up in legal. And I went crazy because I was like, he said, but salespeople always do that. And I said, well, not when your boss is the lawyer, is the general counsel. That's not really, anyway. So get the contract drafted, make sure your lawyers understand the deal. Agreements never ever come into play unless there's a problem. So make sure that the language that's in there, less is more. If you're, you know, if you happen to be a lawyer on this, in my experience, having a 20-page agreement can kill a deal, and that you really want to have, you know, you want to have. So I see my my Mac's about to die. You know, quick and dirty is the best. Be wary when you're signing a form agreement that there's not an auto renew clause, because those auto renew clauses can kill you. Make sure that you really are careful about that. And if you're the smaller entity, be careful because the partnership may be more important for you, and don't agree to things that are going to be hard for you to live up to. There's some things I always ask for when I'm representing the smaller entity is ask for change of control, a joint press release, and very, very tangible commitments. And then the last piece is the implementation. Execution is key to implementing the negotiation. Set realistic integration goals and a process for implementation. Again, I said this earlier, beware of, if you're a smaller entity, agreeing to the custom features that are going to kill you and not make your product better. Assign an account manager to oversee the implementation. And again, just make sure that the agreement really reflects the deal that you've made. In conclusion, authenticity is key. Only work with people who you like. Don't waste time chasing people who don't have aligned goals unless you really must. Listen, create a collaborative and empathetic setting. And if you're severing a relationship, remember your bottom line and create solutions for mutual gain. So that is it from me. I think that we've got 1 minute left. Sorry, I haven't really been monitoring the chat, but I think Bentley's been doing that for me. Rhea, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I answered your question, but I would read the book, and I would say if they start so low, you know, go high. That, you know, Chris would say never meet in the middle, but think about, you know, what really is going to work for you. Oh, I like that. That's a really good tip, Brenly, that you can legally ask for a salary range when talking to recruiters about opportunities. Don't bet against yourself. All right, ciao. Thanks, everyone.